Welcome to another iteration of Tech Bites for February 2021. I am so pleased to be here with you all, and I'm pleased to welcome Bill Alderson, the founder and CTO for one of our member companies, Hop Zero. Hey, Bill, tell us about your career in the data security field and a little bit about how you built Hop Zero.
I'd love to. I'm a native Californian. My family came to California in the mid-1800s. And actually, Jessica, the view in the background is where my family settled in the mid-1800s.
Oh, I wish our listeners could see it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and actually, that's where a cabin is with a group of our family who still has a cabin there. But being a native Californian and being a pioneer, my relatives started in France, moved to Downton, England, came to New Jersey, went over the Isthmus of Panama, and came to California in the mid-1800s. And they instilled in me, I think, go west, young man, go west. And boy, did they ever go west, as far as they could go until they fell into the ocean at this spot right here. So I have a deep heritage of pioneer kind of mentality. Actually started backpacking when I was 13 and went out into the wilderness alone, believe it or not, right there, in that particular area of the country south of Monterey. So that instilled in me this pioneer spirit, and that I can do anything that my heart sets me out to do. Now, overnight success takes a long time. It's not overnight. So I started at Lockheed Missiles and Space Company after I got out of the Navy in 1978, and I quickly got into network communications. And I actually operated and ran a secure network around the country, developing a air-launched cruise missile. It was classified, it's no longer now. But that's what got me the start in communications. And I loved communications. And that's what got me, started in communications very early. And I was the young guy, and I had modems and different things of that nature way back when they were super slow. Now we have very high-speed networks. And I got into what you call protocol analysis, looking at packets. And I've since been part of, several startups. One was the very first sniffer. Actually, our product was named Sniffer, and created the name Sniffer like you might hear Kleenex today. And that was called Network General Sniffer. And that product sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of network analyzers. And I then, as one of the secure systems managers of that company, had to train people. And so I had to train 3Com and Novell and all these different companies and IBM. And so I ended up learning the theory of how protocols worked and protocol theory and that sort of thing to diagnose problems. And so I had a sniffer and I would travel. So after I left Network General, they went public, and very successful organization, became Network Associates and a very large organization. And then I started training people on network forensics using computer network analyzers. And that ended up causing me to have an acquisition by a local Austin company called NetQoS. NetQoS used to be over on Plaza on the lake and right by the bridge. And my office would look out right over the river there. It was beautiful. And so here in Austin, I consoled myself being a Western pioneer that at least I was still West.
You gotta come up with some good reasoning, right? Yeah,
exactly.
I love it.
Yeah. So NetQoS, 4 years after I joined them, we sold for $200 million to CA Technologies. And that freed me and a whole bunch of other people. And we all went and did a few different things. And then we got back together and we created this really cool thing to limit how far data traveled. And we, wrote the patents and that sort of thing. And just a few months ago, we were granted the patent to limit data travel on computer networks. And that's pretty much the story of how Hop Zero got built and what we are doing now. We call it hop starvation. It limits a computer's ability to communicate only a certain distance across a network. And that means that we can keep stuff in the data center, and we're focusing on keeping things in so data doesn't get out. But in addition to that, it's all done by protocols. And that was enabled because of my deep protocol theory and understanding. And that's how we have architected this particular solution. So it was not easy having a startup. We've now gotten several $1 million. We're, moving forward with go to market now. Things are, we're out at Concordia University. We have a partnership with Concordia. Our offices are out there. We love the Concordia campus and all the people there. And so we hold various functions there with the incubator and other events to teach people about computer network security. And sometimes we're teaching people who, I've been called out to the retired people about how to secure your systems and that sort of thing. So I've tried to help people learn how to secure things. For instance, some people will tell you, never write down a password. My first rule is always write down your password, but don't include one key character.
Yeah.
If you only know.
That's
because
really
people are going to write it down. And when they write it down and put it right by their computer, somebody can sit down and use it. But if you leave out one character, it makes it really easy to write down all your passwords, leave out one character that only you know. And so those are the sort of things that I think about and try and help people, the average person, use security more efficiently and effectively.
That is quite impressive. And I'll step back and say congratulations on the recent patent. That's great. Moving on, let's talk about your report, the SolarWinds Breach, Part 1. And I'll give it a little plug here, The Anatomy of a Massive Data Breach, 11 Steps Evading Prevention and Detection. And so we're going to go through Part 1 here. You mentioned a DLL file. And like you said, for the folks who are inexperienced, like myself, can you tell us a little bit about what the DLL file is?
A DLL file is like a list of instructions for an application. So you've probably heard about EXE file, which we're afraid of, well, the EXE has to reference DLLs to pull some of its information from to execute that. And that's what a DLL file is. So it goes along with the executable and has additional instructions that are not in the EXE. And that way they can modify the DLL without modifying the EXE and that sort of thing. It's just part of compiling the system. And that DLL file gets compiled along with the EXE file and all the install files. And that's what the hackers did. They managed to get that file in the exact right place at the exact right time to be included and authenticated as part of the update package.
That is so riveting, somewhat scary. Well, not somewhat, it is scary. So you just started in about how this happened. Can you walk us through in a little bit more detail how that breach with SolarWinds happened this time around after they put in that DLL file in the right time in the right place? What happened next?
Well, it's very interesting. You mentioned the 11 steps, and that's exactly what I've documented step by step with a big diagram in Part 1 that I disclose and show people. Number 1, the attack code was placed just perfectly. Number 2, it got compiled as an authentic part of the update. Number 3, that compiled set of files was put on the internet update server of SolarWinds. Now it's available for users, owners of SolarWinds Orion to download it. And so it got into the server because the users pulled it down to install the update. And this particular update's kind of interesting because it was about the SolarWinds Orion improvement program. So have you ever clicked one of those boxes and said, would you just share some anonymous information with us so it'll help us improve the software? Well, that's the part of the code that they got into. And so it ended up inside the install, and that's what they used to get into the server. And interestingly, once in the server, a lot of people take solace in the fact that the SolarWinds server didn't hold the credit cards, didn't hold the secrets. Here's the thing. That SolarWinds server has very deep monitoring capability. And in order to monitor the deep parts of Linux and Windows servers or SQL servers, it has to have the password in order to get into the server at the system level. And once it gets into the server, it has then the access of everything that that server has. And they can be, those credentials can be reused to get access to the data that's on that server, which means, you know, the comfort of knowing that, yeah, the SolarWinds server didn't itself contain the data. The problem was it had access to every server and therefore every piece of data in the network.
Wow.
Massive problem because, you know, and some people try to hide behind the fact, well, SolarWinds doesn't have all the data. Yeah, but you gave them access to everything with it. So not so much.
Mm-hmm. And I know you referenced in your report, you know, the people who are eager to keep their operating systems up to date and their software up to date and who are trying to altruistically keep everything up to date and share this information so that they can enable progress for these pieces of software that they're using are the ones who enabled it. And I fall right into that category. Anytime I get a prompt to say, would you like to anonymously help us or, you know, help our product get better? I'm like, of course, I would like to help you make your product get better. And so that, I mean, I'm going to have to take a second look from now on. Anytime we're going to have to call you, I will call your cell phone anytime I'm ready to push a button. So can you tell us about how this was discovered? And maybe a little bit about how long it went undetected?
Well, there's various, you know, of course, I wasn't involved in all the details of every organization and when it happened, but it's purported to have happened somewhere around March of 2020. And after people got into these servers in March of 2020, they pretty much had free access until it was discovered. Interestingly, how was it discovered? There's a company called FireEye, probably one of the top, most respected security companies in the world. Well, all of these companies, including the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they all have these toolkits that they use to simulate break-ins to organization. So here's these organizations with billion-dollar budgets that are breaking into nation states. You know, they're doing this for anti-terrorism and everything else. And so they have spent enormous sums of money and gained access through classified information and disclosures from companies whenever they'll participate. And so they know how to break into things. They built that into their own tool set. We call them the red team tools that break in. Then there's the blue team who's defending. So FBI, CIA, NSA, and FireEye just recently lost the tools that they use to simulate or to actually break in. Now, hackers really break in and cause havoc. These companies and organizations break in to show that they can and show you where they broke in so that you can patch it up and mitigate it.
Sure.
Well, in this particular situation, the only reason, you know, none of the big companies found it, none of the big organizations found it, and then FireEye was out searching for their lost tools. And they noticed something. And that's what led to the uncovering of the SolarWinds breach was FireEye looking for their own lost tools. So they found it and then started disclosing it. And then, of course, now it's open and everybody sees it and that sort of thing, and understands it. And we've done a great analysis on it. And I even took and captured packets going to the server that was used for exfiltration that was on Microsoft's network. And so they published all these IP addresses and all the HTTP URLs, and I got a private network and I actually captured the packets going to that nefarious server.
Oh my goodness.
And I learned some things that most people probably don't learn, and that's in my report. Because I'm a packet analyst, I do deep packet inspection. I figure things out and I see things that the average person or even security person may not see. So that's what I've disclosed in my report. And I've talked about the dangers of having your system connected to the internet. Well, in the networks that I started managing early on within Lockheed and the U.S. government, U.S. CENTCOM and other places, I've been recently around the world looking at all the network control centers that the U.S. military has in Afghanistan, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Djibouti. That was a fun one. Anyway, so I've been to all these different places and looked at all these networks and seen, actually they all use SolarWinds. Here's the difference. They have two networks. They have one that's secure and one that's non-secure. The non-secure one is connected to the internet. The secure one has an air gap. It physically never touches the internet. So my security is, we air gap. We don't let these big servers like SolarWinds that have all the crown jewels of our information. We do not let them touch the internet except for very, very tightly controlled areas. Well, this SolarWinds hack was impossible to be successful unless the user allowed the SolarWinds server to access the internet. So essentially, yes, the hackers were very smart. Yes, it was really craftily done, but those hackers are not omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. They are not God. They make mistakes. And I find them with my packet analyzer because I look at things, because when hackers get into a server, the first thing they do is cover their tracks. Anything they get at and anything they do, they expunge from the log. Mm-hmm. So if your security is dependent upon looking at those logs to determine, like Splunk does, to determine if a hacker has been in there, they fooled you. If they get in, the first thing they do is cover their tracks. So I always capture all this information on the network, summarize it, and that's the difference in what I do. I do it with a different vent, a different place. So once a packet gets on the wire and it goes out to the internet, they're exposed, and they can cover their tracks and all those logs all they want. I've got them. They can't get away from the fact that they actually put their packet on the wire, and I record that. And that's the information that I use to know if somebody's been in or compromised and that sort of thing. So it's a different approach than the rest of the multi-billion-dollar companies are taking. And that's the part of the equation that I'm bringing to this report.
Sure. It sounds like you're letting them dig their own hole, kind of a thing, once it gets onto the wire there. So has the type of breach that occurred in March of 2020, has that happened before? And do you think it's something that might happen again?
Well, of course, it happens almost. I mean, you can't pick up the morning newspaper or watch the nightly news without another big company announcing some type of a disclosure of information. It's widely disseminated. It's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the U.S. government security infrastructure. The first thing that they do before you get access to that secret network is you have to go through a whole battery of investigations and that sort of thing. Well, guess what? A few years back, the Office of Personnel Management (OPM) lost all the records on me, all my brothers and sisters, all my aunts, everybody that I reported on those forms as being, whether they were foreign or domestic or what have you, and they do all that security research. If you got a security clearance from 1985 to 2015, all those forms about all your family, all their socials, all your kids' names and their socials, fully disclosed. So that means that the Russians and the Chinese know everybody with a top secret security clearance, and they know all their brothers and sisters and where they've lived and where they live now and all their credit. It's just phenomenal. And yeah, the US government lost that information.
That takes me aback. If we were actually putting the video on this, y'all would see me with my hands up over my mouth. To keep my jaw from dropping.
And of course, I'm a discloser of those sort of things. They hire me to come in to the Pentagon to bring it back up when after 9/11. I went around the world to help the military solve very complex problems. And, I have to get in there and figure it out. And believe me, when I get in and figure it out, and it's, Department of Justice talking to, the FBI or what have you, and I'm disclosing who is at fault for the disclosure or what have you. Trust me, I watch my back. It's scary because there are so much writing on these things politically that the leadership is not very technical, obviously, appropriately, but it really is a sad thing, and that we don't open up the kimono when we have a problem and say, hey, let's fix this. But they did report, OPM lost all that information. They do report these things. Sadly, they don't often get at the bottom line. And the bottom line in the SolarWinds breach, truly, yes, probably the Russians, probably a nation state who got in and, was the catalyst for the attack. But they probably had help from inside job kind of situations. And if you read my report, I'll talk to you about some of those sort of things. But the biggest problem was if they would have controlled access to the internet of the SolarWinds server, wouldn't have done anything.
Right. We wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah.
And so I know we'll be covering more of this in the Engineering Leadership Roundtable. If anybody wants to sign up for that, that'll be on our TicketBud page. But can you give us a little sneak preview of how this may have been stopped, either in this instance or maybe a couple of pieces of advice for companies, leadership of companies who might be listening in on this conversation about how to mitigate this from happening within their company?
Well, first of all, in the piece, I do talk about the perspectives of communications. And the first lesson to learn is when something is coming from the internet into your company, you discriminate on that direction more highly than you discriminate internally. So if somebody walks over and puts a paper on your desk at work, you're not as worried about it as if you find some mysterious paper in the mail that came from outside. We're more sensitive to things coming in from anonymous than we are from things that might have come from inside our organization. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have inside threats. It just means we're hypersensitive when we know it came from somewhere that we don't know who it was. So in my paper, and I talk about this, is that the directional perspective is important. Coming from the internet in, very important. Going from your inside out, another important thing. And then I do the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, why. It's the who done it. It's who was it, what IP address, what was its name, where did it originate from, what country did it come from. I can take it right down to the street address of where a packet came from. Now, hackers do hide where they're truly coming from, but like I said, they make mistakes. They make a mistake and try something that's similar from a hidden location from a known location. They put a VPN out to the internet and then try to break into you. But what if they one time click the button to go out and try and break into you, but it exposed their real location? They do things like that. And if you're alert to those sort of things and you vet the who, what, when, where, and why, you can usually find that out. And so I show several tools in here and several methods that the average person can understand everything that I've written in this report. None of this is jargon. None of it requires massive understanding of theory or what have you. And if there is something that's instructional, I provide that instruction. Lots of pictures. There's 25 diagrams, pictures, and that sort of thing, steps of how things happen in the paper, because I've been instructing tens of thousands of people in dozens of countries, and I know what people need to learn very rapidly. So I've reduced the time to understanding by using the pictures and the tables and the diagrams and then depicting them 1 through 11 and that sort of thing. And I even in the back have a session on who was at fault for each step, each of those 11 steps.
Oh,
was it
interesting.
SolarWinds? Was it the programmer? Was it the victim? And, so in this particular situation, of course, ultimately the criminal is at fault. He's the catalyst. He's the motivated party, who's trying to harm us. But, SolarWinds made some errors in there, right?
Sure.
And then the victim themselves made some errors. Like I said, if the victim would not have allowed the server to ubiquitously access the internet, never would have happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now the Trojan got in, and if the Trojan was a Trojan that destroyed data, it could have come in and destroyed data. In this situation, it came in and then set itself up to exfiltrate information from the server to that Microsoft server that I was telling you about, that I went and analyzed the packets to and that sort of thing. And so I have this really neat diagram that goes through those 11 steps and who, from my opinion, of course, it's an opinion piece at that point. I'm not going to accuse somebody and have a legal problem, but obviously it's America, and we're allowed to express our opinion as long as we express it as, hey, this may have happened, or that may have happened, or it might have been this. And so I talk about those 11 steps and who was responsible. And you can put yourself in those steps and say, wow, as the victim, I could have protected myself.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that's really helpful and valuable for these companies, who not only are you getting the folks who would know the jargon and who are experienced with data security like this to look at it in a different way, but also how do you train your individual employees who are not experienced to identify when there's something fishy going on, so that they're not, inadvertently exposing your network to something nefarious. So that's really interesting. I think that that's probably going to be, that would be the most helpful for me personally. But is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about with the folks who are listening?
Well, I do believe that we all have a role to play in security. But there was recently a big article in the Wall Street Journal that said, stop making me afraid. These are employees of companies. Absolutely losing sleep, fearful, because in doing their job, they may click on the wrong thing at the wrong time. making employees the responsible parties is the wrong way to go. And I believe that it is really incumbent upon the security personnel and leadership to put in the right tools to be able to diagnose, detect, mitigate, and alarm on these type of things that occur. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't all bear a hand. But I think of recent years, we're spending billions of dollars on training people what not to click on, and not nearly enough on the technology that insulates them from that responsibility.
Very, very good point of view. I agree with that 100%.
I bet
And
you do.
so again, Bill Alderson, founder and CTO of Hop Zero, his report called SolarWinds Breach, Part 1, Anatomy of a Massive Data Breach, 11 Steps Evading Prevention and Detection, is online, and it'll be in the link of our event page as well as on our blog page. So please go online, take a look at that. And thanks so much, Bill, for coming and being a part of this. I had an extraordinary time talking to you, like I always do. Can't wait to get back into person, and we're going to go have a happy hour together so we can hear all about your travels all around the world.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I do look forward to hosting you at some event at Concordia University, you and ATC folks. We do a lot of events there with the Concordia University Incubator, and it's a lot of fun. And we used to do them a lot. And of course, COVID has shut us down for the most part, but we still do them virtually.
Yeah, we would love to. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Okay. Thank you.